Hey guys, welcome back to another video of my Let's Solve Tactics series. So last time I had reached I think the 1200 rating. So let's see how far we can take it today. Okay, so just like before, if you would like to solve with me, go ahead and pause your video. It's black to move. White has just moved the rook to h5. Okay, so uh, of course, I noticed that this bishop is currently being attacked by my king, so that could be a tactical target, which is only protected by his rook. So if we can somehow remove his rook from the defense of the bishop, we would be able to win the bishop. What else? Uh, if my rook can get to the back rank, let's say with the support from a knight, that would checkmate. Other than that, there is also a possibility of going c4 at some point, and also white's last move. White attacked my knight, so it looks like the knight needs to move. And moving knight to f6 will fork the rook and the bishop, and at that point the bishop will be attacked twice by our king and the knight. So I think that should be the right move. So let's calculate knight to f6. So knight to f6, since we are attacking his rook, white needs to do something about that. If they move their rook to g5 with check, we can simply capture king takes h7, and uh, what else can they do? If they go bishop f5, I think I can take their rook, and if they take my rook, I win their bishop at the end. So knight f6 should be good. Okay, and white just moves back, and I take their bishop. Okay, 5 points. Let's keep going. So again, white to play. If you would like to pause your video, go ahead and do so now. Okay. Black has just captured something on g7. I forgot what that was. Okay. Uh, so what I notice is there is of course a lot of pressure on the f file with the queen and rook looking at the f2, f7 pawn, which is very well defended by his queen, rook, and knight. But his king position does look pretty exposed, so we should, I think, start looking at checks. So rook g5 check is a candidate. Queen d4 check could be a candidate. Uh, I think we'll start there. So rook g5 check. He is forced to go back to the corner. Yeah, and then I have queen f6 check with a checkmate. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, guys. So full disclosure, I actually stopped recording some time back. That's why you see the same problem, but the clock is running and it's been running for a while. I just checked the recording, and there is a bit of a noise. So something is going on outside my house here, and they are speaking on a loudspeaker and stuff. And so I think I'll keep this recording short. So we'll see if I can take it to 1300, and that's where I'll stop it. And yeah, so sorry about the interruption. Hopefully you can still enjoy the video. So okay, so I believe it is black to play here. Yep, so black to move, and yeah, go ahead if you would like to think. Okay, so what do I notice? There is a lot of pressure around his king position, and queen takes h4 is possible. I'm attacking the h4 pawn twice. Also, there is this alignment with the queen, between my queen and his rook. So let's see. Queen g1 check is a candidate, I think. Queen to h4, queen takes h4 is a candidate. Exchanging queens. In that endgame, I don't think I'm doing too well. But okay, let's see. So queen to g1 check, king to h3 would be forced. And what can I do there? It is not clear. Queen to e3 check, he can simply go back. Hmm. Okay, knight to f4. I don't think I'm threatening anything. So queen g3 check, king h3, and then knight to f4 check is possible. Okay, whereupon he would have to go to g3, or he can take my knight, which of course is winning for me. I'll recapture his queen. Uh, okay, so sorry, queen g1. I've been saying g3. I'm sorry. Queen g1 check, king h3. At that point, actually, I have knight g1 as well as knight f4 as candidates. So let's look at knight f4. Uh, he goes to g3 with his king, and at that point, I could come to e1, queen e1 check. His king is forced to actually he can go back there to h2, so that's not the right idea for sure, because we are not achieving anything. So let's look again. Queen to g1 check, king h3. Now I think let's try hmm, what else can we try? Knight f4, king g3, queen e1, king h2. No, don't see it. Okay, what about queen f4 check directly? He just trades queens and I capture back with the knight, and then my bishop is lost at the end. So that's not possible. Okay. I feel like I need to get my bishop involved somehow, but I'm not able to see how to do that. What about a quiet move like queen e1 right away? Uh, if he takes my bishop, then I have queen g1, king h3. I don't have a good follow-up there. That's the problem. Knight f4 doesn't lead to anything. Hmm. Okay, so I am distracted by the noise outside, but I will not make an excuse. Let's keep trying different candidates here. So queen g1 is a candidate. Queen f4, I don't believe it works, but it's could be a candidate. Queen takes h4 is a candidate. With the knight f4 could be something. I don't know if knight g1 or knight g3 makes sense. Maybe knight g1, with the idea of going knight f1 check next. But even there, if he goes to h3, I'm not sure if it's leading to anything. Hmm. Knight d4 is nothing. Moving the bishop anywhere right now will lead to a loss of my queen, and I don't see how that's helping me. So queen g1 check, king h3, queen e3 check. He has choices there. He can go back, or he could even block with his queen, for example. What is white threatening at this point? Is white having an active threat? Not really, but I feel like I need to resolve this pin situation between the rook and my queen. Hmm. Okay. We are gonna. I'm gonna take a shot at queen g1 and see if I'm on the right track. Okay. So far, so good. Okay. So now knight f4 is the next candidate or the next move that looked interesting. What other moves do I have here? Queen e1 is possible, but he can just repeat with queen g1, which I don't think I should be unhappy with. I am not unhappy with the draw here. But let's see if there is more. Knight f4 check, and there is queen e3 check. Again, he can repeat. So knight f4 check is the logical follow-up. Knight f4 check, whereupon he must go to g3. And there I have options. Actually, oh, I just take his bishop on g2. Sorry about that. That took me a long time to figure out, but I did. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going. I think the yeah distractions got me. Okay. Next one. So go ahead if you would like to pause. It is white to play. Now, fortunately, I feel like I see the solution right away. So you see his king is very trapped in this position. So rook to h1 check comes to mind. The idea would be he is forced to capture my rook on h8. Sorry, rook h8 I meant. And I take on f7, hitting his rook. But not only am I attacking the rook, I'm also trapping the king on the h file. And the next move, rook h1, will be mate, which he is not able to stop. So I feel pretty confident about that. And I will play it. And now we checkmate black. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, a pawn in game, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. White has just captured our b3 pawn. A takes b3. Okay, so I think this pawn in game is better for black simply because our pawns are further advanced than white's are. So if you can see, white's pawns on the queen side are close to his, close to their starting positions. Basically, you know, the C and B pawn are still on their original squares, and the A2 pawn just captured, whereas our pawns are far advanced. So if you can imagine, the black pawn started on the 7th rank, but now they are all the way up to the 4th rank. Okay, so that gives us some opportunities. So I am looking at the possibility of a breakthrough to create a passed pawn. So either c3, pawn to c3 that is, or pawn to a3 would be candidates. But I think pawn to a3 he just simply captures, and I don't create a passed pawn. So pawn to c3 has to be correct. So I'm threatening c takes b2 with a quick promotion. So he needs to capture, or he can try to bring his king. If he tries to bring his king around, let's say king to d3, I just take on b2, and next move I'm promoting, and he's not able to control the b1 square thanks to his pawn being on c2, so he cannot play king c2. So after pawn to c3, he takes, and I go a3, and then my next two moves will be a2 and a1 queen, and he's not able to stop that. He can try pushing his pawns. So let's say b4, a2, b5, a1 queen. that will be winning. And also notice that on the other side, my king is within the square of the pawn. So if you're not familiar with the idea of a square, whenever a lone king is trying to stop a pawn from promoting, that is running towards the promotion square, you can imagine a square like so. So basically something like this. And since my king happens to be within this square of this pawn, I'll be able to easily stop the promotion. So c3 is correct. c3, a3. Okay, and we get 5 points. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So I notice first thing is his bishop is attacking our rook, but there is an option of me capturing his bishop on c7, and when he captures I can also just capture back. And in that position I'll be an exchange down basically, so I'll have rook and bishop against his two rooks. And given that white is also up a pawn, that position by itself will be losing for me. So queen takes c7 we can pretty much rule out, unless there is some great follow-up, which I don't think there is. So what other things do I notice? There's of course the lineup of the rooks, my rook and his rook on the f file. There are some checks. So bishop e3 check, or queen e3 check, or queen c5 check. Now queen c5 check looks very interesting because that not only is a check but also hits his bishop on c6, which is loose. So queen c5 check, he would be forced to go to either g2 or h1, since blocking with either rook or the queen will lead to the loss of that piece. So queen c5 check, let's say king to h1 or king to g2. Whatever he does, I can take the c6 bishop with check, and on that check, he can block that check with queen d5 or rook d5, but I'll be able to take the other bishop as well then. So queen c5 wins both the bishops, and after that black will be winning because I'll be left with an extra bishop. So queen c5 check, check, and next move would be queen takes c7. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, go ahead. If you would like to pause your video, it's black to play. White has just captured our pawn on f7. Okay, so the first thing I notice is this bishop is hanging with check. So, and also that happens to be a fork between his king and rook. But we should not play it yet because our own rook on d8 is also hanging, and there may be some other moves that are possible. So rook e2 being a check, it's obviously a candidate. Rook f8 is possible, but he just takes on d8, and I don't think I achieve anything too great. So knight takes f4 should be the first one we calculate. So knight takes f4 check. Now, if the king separates from the rook, so let's say a move like king to uh, f3, I can always take the rook on h3, and uh, that will net me a rook and a bishop. And at the end, I'm not too unhappy about him capturing my rook on d8. So let's say knight takes f4 check, king to f3, knight takes h3, knight takes d8, king takes d8. And in that position, I am up by a whole knight and I should be winning. So if he doesn't separate, which is more expected, so let's say knight takes f4, he keeps his rook protected, let's say with a move like king to g3 or king to h2. So in that case, let's say king to g3 actually. That looks most interesting and most probable because that not only defends his rook but also attacks our knight. So there we can take his rook or we may do something else. So let's say knight takes h3. Now he probably takes my rook because if he just takes my knight on h3, I can move my rook. Let's say with a move like rook to d5, and I would be having two rooks versus his rook and knight, which should be winning for me. So, or rook takes d3 actually, rook takes d3 check. So, knight takes f4 check, king g3, knight takes h3, knight takes d8. What do I have there? If I simply capture back, rook takes d8, king takes h3, king takes knight, rook takes pawn check. In that rook endgame, it's equal pawns, and it is. I mean, I am better. I would definitely say I'm better with my active rook. But is that the best I got? Also, on the first move, let's look at other candidates. Rook to e2 check, king f3, and I think I've not helped myself too much because now my rook is also hanging on. Both my rooks are hanging. The e2 rook is attacked by the king. The d8 rook is attacked by the knight. So I think we can confidently go ahead and play knight takes f4 check and see how white responds. Okay, so king to f3. So he is separating from his rook, which, as we discussed, is the easier line. Now, we had planned knight takes h3 here, but let's look at other possibilities. Uh, so knight takes h3. If I take his rook, he gets to take my rook and I take back. And what I end up with is a situation where I have knight and rook against his lone rook on a1. Versus, I am seeing another possibility. Rook takes d3 check. That saves my own rook from attack, by the way. So notice that my own rook that is on d8 now will be on d3. And that is also a skewer. So his best bet would be to take my knight. And then I can take his rook on h3. Uh, and in that situation, I am left with two rooks versus rook and knight. Also, I have netted up extra pawn there. So knight takes h3, knight takes d8, rook takes d8. Or, so do I take the rook now and uh, I get a whole rook plus, and I lose an exchange. Okay. Or do I take his pawn on d3? So let's count the material in each case. I think this is a very important point. So what am I gaining and what am I losing from this point moving forward in each variation? So if I go down the knight takes h3 route, knight takes rook, take his rook immediately. So I win a rook, so I get 5 points. He takes my rook, so at that very moment, we are equal. And I take his knight, so I get another. I get 3 points. I am up by 3 points now. And he will have the opportunity to save his pawn, let's say with rook to d1 at that point. Uh, now, uh, if I go down the other variation, rook takes d3, I win a pawn. So I'm up by a point. I lose a knight, but then I get a rook. So I'm getting 5 plus 1, 6 points, but I'm losing 3 versus the other variation where I am. Uh, hmm. So I'm either getting a knight or I'm getting a rook and a pawn for a knight. I think getting the rook and a pawn for a knight is better, so I'm gonna do this. Oh, we got that wrong. Okay. So the first problem that we get wrong in this series, that was bad. Okay, so let's analyze this. Okay, knight takes f4, king f3. Now rook takes d3 is not as good because he takes, I take, and he has knight d6 check at the end. Okay. Okay, so you see, I didn't follow my own advice and I didn't pay attention to what happens at the end of the variation. And we got one incorrect. Well, that's not good. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, fine. So, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. Uh, so the first thing I notice is this big long diagonal where I have the bishop, and there are a lot of weak squares around this king. So f3, h3, they are all weak. So there may be some checkmating ideas along the light squares. So queen to f3 suggests itself, threatening a checkmate. Moving his king is not possible, and there are no other moves that he can make with any pieces that protect the h3 square. He can throw some random check at d8 or capturing my pawn on g7, but that shouldn't help. Yeah. Okay, that is correct. Let's keep going. Okay, so black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So I noticed that we have a lineup of rooks against his back rank, which is only covered once. So rook to d1 check is the first candidate I'll look at. So rook to d1 check, he captures the rook and I capture back with the other rook. And at that point, he'll be forced to go king to a2. And in that position, he has created an alignment issue for himself where the queen and king are lined up, and I'll have bishop e6 spinning and winning his queen. So he actually does not uh, uh, take my rook, but I don't think that changes anything because I can still go bishop e6, and if he takes my rook, I can throw in a check first. So he takes my bishop, I take back, and I have won their queen. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So I noticed this alignment of the king and the bishop, sorry, the rook and the bishop, and I can exploit that by capturing his bishop and then creating a bishop fork, and whereupon I win the rook. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so white to play. Go ahead again if you would like to pause your video. So hmm, I notice his king position, of course, which the king is very compromised and open, and it literally has no moves. So we should look at checks. Rook to e1 check comes to mind. We should not automatically recapture just because he captured on d1. So rook to e1 check. Now notice that bishop e7 is not possible because of this pin right here. So bishop e7 would not be possible. Uh, so he would be forced to block with his rook because notice again this bishop on d7 is also pinned like that, so it cannot uh, block as well. So rook to e6 would be forced, or he can of course block with his queen, in which case I take his queen with my rook followed by taking on f8. That would be easily winning. So rook e1 check, the real candidate is rook to e6. So let's keep going down the forcing moves track. So we take his rook, check. He needs to capture with the pawn because again the bishop is pinned. And there we have queen to h5 check, which is checkmate. Yeah. Okay, he throws in another interposition with the knight, and now the rook. And the next move after f takes e6 would have been queen to h5 checkmate. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, uh, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So the first thing I notice is, of course, my queen is hitting this pawn on h4, and that will be a fork between his king and the bishop. So let's remove this arrow. Okay, so that's the first candidate. So that will force king to h2. Whereupon I don't think I should take the bishop, but I can play for checkmate by going rook to d1 check. And I think that is mate since the f2 square is covered by my rook. Sorry, by my queen. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, uh, white to play. Black has just played their bishop out to c5. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So I noticed that I have this advanced knight on b5, and whenever you have a knight on b5 and the opponent has not castled, you should be thinking about a fork on c7. So that's an idea I'm playing with. So I'm thinking about uh, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, rook c1, whereupon I'm trying to use the rook to protect the c7 square for an upcoming fork on c7. But that's one idea. There may be others. Let's look. Okay. Knight to c7 check directly. He just takes my knight. I don't think I achieve anything. With my light square bishop, I don't see any forcing moves. Same with the queen. Knight to d6 check again can be met by capturing with the queen onto, capturing the knight with the queen. So bishop takes c5 really is the only move. Otherwise, rook to c1 directly can be tried, but uh, I'm pretty confident that bishop takes c5 is correct. Now, after bishop c5, what are the different moves he can make? Of course, he can recapture. Excuse me. And otherwise, he can protect his queen, but not recapture. But in that case, I have simply, let's say, queen to c6. Notice that queen to a6 will lead to the same fork between his on c7, and his queen will be hanging on a6. So bishop c5, queen to c6. At a minimum, we can just retreat our bishop, and we are very happy. So let's do that. Okay, now rook to c1 was planned, basically attacking his queen. Notice that if he takes my bishop, sorry, my knight, of course, I take back his queen, which might be his best bet. Or, yeah, uh, or he can just let me take, let me go ahead with the fork on c7. So rook to c1 check, or rook to c1, and I fork. And then I take his rook, and also my knight will probably not get trapped and be able to come back to civilization later on with through c7, via c7. Okay. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. Okay, so I notice, first thing I notice really is this queen position. The queen looks quite short of squares. Second is I notice our queen is attacking their pawn on g7. Okay, uh, what else? There is of course the queen e4 check possibility. Queen e3 check is possible. So let's make a list of candidate moves from this position. I think that will be helpful. Rook g1, attacking the queen, is one. Queen e4 check, queen e3 check. I don't think queen takes g7 is a candidate. Bishop to b5 check is a check also, which we could consider. Uh, with this rook on a1, I don't think I have anything very dangerous. With the knight, I could consider going to h4, attacking his queen. So let's start with the. I'm going to start with attacking the queen actually. So rook g1. So in that position, he to save his queen, he can only go to h3. Now, where all can the queen go from h3? Actually, it can go all the way along this h3 d7 diagonal. So rook to g3. If I play rook to g3, he can simply retreat to, let's say, f5. But also, rook to g1, queen h3 allows me to then capture his pawn on g7 with my queen, which will let me capture his rook next, which is trapped. So rook g1, queen h3, queen g7. And I don't see a way for him to either check me other than, uh, going to e6 with his queen, whereupon I capture it, or protect his rook. He's not able to protect his rook either. So he's not able to bring his queen to, for example, f6 easily. Uh, I also don't see any counter-attacking moves, but let's examine the other candidates quickly since we have made a mistake earlier in the session. So queen to e3 check. At a minimum, he can, let's say, develop with knight to e7, block with the knight, and I don't see what I have achieved. After that, rook g1, queen h3, even a move like knight g5 doesn't lead to anything. He can retreat his queen. Uh, Queen e4 check. Again, he can block with the knight at a minimum or move his king. But I don't see a follow-up. I'm going to go ahead with rook to g1. Okay, and he gives up his. Okay, 1295. My rating, that is. Okay, so black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. Uh, hmm. Okay, so of course I noticed that I can take his pawn on d4 with check, whereupon he has some choices. I don't think any of his choices will be good. So if he goes to h1, then I of course can checkmate him with queen to a1 check. He will be required to block with his queen, whereupon I'll capture the queen and that'll be mate. So the other option after queen takes d4 check will be to block with his queen on f2. But there again, I can throw in queen to a1 check, and because the f2 queen prevents the king from coming up the board, he will be forced to block again on e1 or f1. In either case, I'll capture, and that will be checkmate. So yeah, he just decides to give up his queen on e3 instead. I think doesn't change the outcome because again he's forced to go to h1 and I checkmate him. Okay, with that I have achieved a 1300 plus rating. I will stop the video here. Sorry about the distraction earlier. I was distracted by the noise and I think that affected my concentration. But I'm not gonna make an excuse. Yeah, as we get further and further into the series, the problems will increase in difficulty, and you will see me struggle with some of them. So hopefully you can uh, enjoy looking at me being real and sharing my mistakes also with you guys along with all my successful attempts. And yeah, hopefully this is entertaining and helpful. Bye, I will see you in the next video.